Now, I didn't know it at the time, but the training I received in the Army as a combat medic was the greatest crash course in risk management that I could have asked for. I mean, imagine this. Bullets are flying, emotions are high, and you have 3 injured soldiers needing your help. Their injuries range from a bullet wound to the chest, to an amputated lower leg, to a fractured skull. Now, you need to quickly decide who needs your immediate attention, who can wait, and who is expected to die. You see, in a mass casualty triage situation, you need to prioritize your time and minimize your risk. Well, that was 20 years ago. Today, I'm a risk manager, commercial insurance agent. I'm an author, speaker, podcast host. But really, everything I do is to help companies become bulletproof to all the bad things that can happen. And today, that's what I'm here to help you with. Risk-Surance is a unique blend of risk management and business insurance. Because when it comes to protecting your company, business insurance is probably all you need if you have less than 20 employees. However, as your company grows and you have more employees, more assets, more obligations, and more risks, you need more than just business insurance. You need to add risk management. You see, in today's sue-happy culture and tougher regulations, it's becoming more important than ever to know how to manage risk. For example, did you know that OSHA issued 21,123 citations in 2022? That's about 84 citations per business day. And many of the fines were well above $100,000. Or how about this? If anybody in your company is accused of sexual harassment, wrongful termination, or age discrimination, it's going to cost your business an average of $125,000 in legal defense, and another $80,000 if there's a settlement. Now, these are real numbers, and today I'm going to tell you about a few of my real clients. You're going to hear about their struggles, but also the solutions we came up with. And then I'm going to give you the tools we used so you can bring them back to your office and hopefully begin managing risk a little better. At the very end, you'll have the opportunity to schedule a time with me so we can discuss any of your concerns and create a plan. So let's start with Corey. I met Corey a few years ago when he was a guest on my podcast. I described Corey as a little bit older than me, a little bit taller than me, but much better looking than me. He's a hardworking, old school contractor who's up super early and at work before anybody else. He's tough, but he's fair, and he always puts people first. Now, his company makes these large metal panels and then they install them on the exterior of commercial buildings. Corey pays between $100,000 and $150,000 for his work comp insurance every year and has about 45 employees. One of these employees is named Heath. Heath works as an installer who spends a lot of time on one of those scissor lifts. Well, one day, as Heath was coming down on the lift, instead of using the ladder, he swung his foot around the side of the lift and placed his foot in one of the closing scissor arms, crushing his foot. Now, luckily, he was able to hit the kill switch before it took his foot completely off. Now, even though Heath broke his foot, there are things he could still do at work. His doctor provided clear work restrictions, and Corey was nice enough to find things around the shop that Heath could do. But here's the problem. Heath refused to come to work. He had excuse after excuse. First, he said he was in too much pain, so we suggested he see his doctor again to adjust his pain meds. Then he said he couldn't drive because the boot on his foot got in the way of the pedals, so we offered transportation. Then he said he could drive, but he didn't want to walk outside because he was afraid he'd slip and fall on the ice. So we offered him to drive directly into the shop where he could park his vehicle indoors. But Heath still wouldn't come to work. Maybe you know somebody like Heath. So we have a problem. When an employee refuses to come back to work, several bad things are going to happen. First, more money will be paid on the claim, which will cause your work comp experience mod to increase and your insurance premium to increase. Now for Corey, it's much more serious because if his mod gets above a 1.0, he will lose about 80% of his contracts. You see, as a commercial subcontractor, the majority of his general contractors require him to have a mod of 1.0 or less. Could you imagine losing 80% of your revenue every year? Also, if Heath doesn't get back to work, it sets a bad precedence for all the other employees who now think, if I get hurt, I get to sit home all day too. Lastly, Minnesota is an experience rating adjustment state, which means if Heath doesn't come back to work within 3 calendar days, Corey will lose out on a 70% mod impact reduction. In other words, on a $10,000 claim, rather than having the full $10,000 count against the mod, only $3,000 will count against Corey's experience mod. Bottom line, we need to get Heath back to work within 3 calendar days. So think about this for a minute. What would you do in this situation? Your injured employee won't come back to work and he keeps coming up with excuse after excuse. Would you just fire him and risk being accused of wrongful termination and then spending $125,000 in legal fees defending yourself? Do you just let Heath do what he wants and not worry about your experience mod or your insurance costs? It's not an easy situation. Well, here's what we did. Luckily, I was working with Corey for about a year when all this happened, so I knew his return to work program was squared away. Now, part of the return to work program needs to include a written offer of light duty, just like any other job offer. It tells the injured employee what he will be doing on light duty, who to report to, when to start, and so on. So I advised Corey to send Heath's light duty job offer to the claim adjuster and inform them that Heath is refusing to come back to work. The claim adjuster then chose to deny Heath his work comp lost time benefits, which means Heath was no longer going to be able to get paid as he sat home. And as you can imagine, Heath suddenly became much more motivated to get back to work. Now, I'm proud to say that Corey has been able to keep his work comp experience mod well below a 1.0, and he continues to win new contracts, grow his business, and hasn't had a workplace injury in over a year now. Regarding Corey's story, I want to give you 3 quick things to help your company manage risk a little better. First, obviously, always offer light duty in writing. In this letter, mention things like what they'll be doing, how much they'll be paid, when to report to work, and so on. If you go to jasonjwebb.com/light duty offer, you can get a copy of the letter I suggest my clients to use, so you can just add your logo and make it your own. Next, have a list of light duty tasks ready to go. When an injured employee is sitting in your office with a broken foot, it becomes way too easy just to send them home because you're unsure what to have them do. So please, just take like 20 minutes to come up with a list of about 10 to 20 things an injured employee could do while they recover from their injury on light duty, because these 20 minutes could save you 70% on a future claim. Lastly, present light duty as a benefit to your employees. For some reason, most employees feel like they're being punished when they're asked to perform light duty, but the reality is it's a benefit to them, because without light duty, they recover slower, they'd get a 33% pay cut, they could lose their health insurance eligibility, not only for themselves, but also their family. And if they're a union employee, they could lose other fringe benefits. So make sure your employees are aware of these things, because you're doing them a favor by offering light duty. So the lesson learned by Corey is to get your return to work program dialed in. Now, the next person I want to introduce you to is Xavier. I happen to know Xavier's CPA, who asked me to give him a call because he noticed Xavier's insurance costs were getting out of control. Now, when I met with Xavier, I discovered that he had a couple bad claims, but the real reason for his insurance premiums getting so high had to do with the way he was buying insurance. In the insurance industry, we refer to this as the flawed and dangerous buying process. Now, let me show you how it works. So take a look at this diagram. There you are at the top, the insurance decision maker for your company. Under you are your insurance policies, and your current agent is in the middle down below. Now, every 2 years or so, you bring in a couple new agents to quote your insurance and make sure your current agent is doing a good job. I used to be this guy. I get a copy of your insurance policies with the prices whited out, run back to my office, fill out my applications, send them off to my underwriters, and typically discover I was too late. Now, let me explain how things work with insurance behind the scenes. It's not first come, first served. It's first come, only served. In other words, if 3 agents were to go to Travelers Insurance Company, ask them for a quote for your business, Travelers will only give a quote to the first agent. The other 2 agents are simply out of luck. This brings up the first problem: blocked access to insurance companies. When the current agent can request quotes from all the good insurance companies 120 days before renewal, no other agent is even able to get a quote. But despite all this, sometimes I'd get lucky. I'd find an insurance company that wasn't already blocked. But typically the reason they weren't blocked is because their pricing is terrible. They're just not competitive. So I'd come back to you with my one overpriced quote, and of course you decide to stay with your current agent. And this brings up the second issue. Xavier had a false sense of doing the right thing. He thought he was keeping his current agent honest by seeing what these other 2 agents could offer. But you can now see how this whole thing is kind of rigged in favor of the current agent. And in doing so, Xavier's insurance kept going up year after year. Now, after I explained all this to Xavier and showed him how Risk-Surance adds the important risk management aspect to his insurance program, Xavier didn't even ask me to get quotes. Instead, he transferred all his insurance over to me and then trusted me to drive the price down over time. The thing is, if you want to save a lot of money on your work comp insurance, you need to understand how pricing works. And you also need to track your multiplier, mod, and credit. MMC. Your multiplier tells us how competitive your insurance company is, and it's public information. We can simply go to a website, look up your insurance company, and compare their rate or their multiplier to any other insurance company. In other words, we can quickly find out how competitive your insurance company is without even going through the quoting process. Now, if we find better multipliers, those would be the companies we ask to get quotes from. Lastly, your multiplier is reflected in the rate per 100 of payroll for each class code found on your insurance policy. Next, it's your workers' compensation experience modification factor, or your mod. Your mod is based on your work comp claim activity over the last 3 years. The more claims you have, the higher your mod. The lower your mod, the better. And you want to know what your minimum mod is, or how low your mod can go. A mod of 1.0 is average. It's like getting a C in school. You're passing, but you're not excelling. If you're currently at a 1.0, you're average, and you can do much better. The last one we need to talk about is your credit. Now, not all states have a scheduled credit, and for those states, they typically have a dividend program. But in Minnesota, where I live, the underwriters can provide anything from a 40% credit up to a 25% debit, which is a 65% swing in price, typically completely at their discretion. So it becomes your agent's responsibility to do a good job negotiating on your behalf. But it's your job to know what your credit currently is. And if it's not 40%, ask why. Sometimes underwriters have the wrong information. They might think you don't even have a return to work program, but you do. And as soon as you send it over to them, they add another 10% credit. Now, to see how this works, let's take a look at Xavier's work comp policy. The first calculation is to take the $3.3 million in payroll that you see at the top, divide that number by 100, and then multiply it by 1.38. to equal $46,151. That 1.38 is the rate per 100. That's where your multiplier lives. After that, we take Xavier's experience mod of 2.54, multiply that by 46,000, which adds on another $71,000 to his premium for a new total of $117,000. The last thing is his credit, or in this case, his 25% debit. His debit is being maxed out. Can't get any worse. The $117,000 is multiplied by the 1.25, which adds another $29,000 per year for a grand total of $146,000 for his work comp insurance. Now, by adding some key risk management processes to Xavier's company, he's going to save a ton of money. This is going to take about 4 to 5 years, but I'm going to be conservative with my numbers. Let's take a look. First off, by improving his multiplier by just about 30%, taking the rate per 100 from 1.38 to a 1.0, it will bring the price down to $33,000. There's a lot of room for improvement in Xavier's experience mod, but just by getting it down to an average of 1.0, the price will remain at $33,000. Lastly, if you remember, Minnesota underwriters are authorized to give up to a 40% credit, but to be conservative, let's say Xavier is only able to get down to a 20% credit. This will save him another $7,000, bringing the price down to $26,000 per year, which is going to save Xavier a total of $120,000 per year. Now, I believe there is no way he would ever save $120,000 if he kept getting quotes from these other agents every couple of years and not allow us to help him with his risk management. There's simply no way. Please don't do what Xavier was doing. Also consider the fact that this extra $120,000 was taken right out of Xavier's profits. And if he has a, let's say, 10% profit margin, he has to sell an extra $1.2 million to make up for the lost $120,000 in profits. Now, I'm happy to say that Xavier's already saved $30,000 his first year, and I expect him to save at least another $30,000 at his upcoming renewal. Now, let's go over the 3 keys to saving money on your work comp insurance. Stop the flawed and dangerous buying process. It's called flawed and dangerous for a reason. Buying insurance this way puts your company and your employees at risk. Getting quotes from a couple of new agents every few years simply doesn't work. Instead, find an agent who can put a plan together designed to drive your insurance costs year after year. Next, focus on the big 3, your multiplier, mod, and credit, MMC. This is the only way you're going to maximize your savings. You need to ask your agent questions like, how many multipliers does my current insurance company have? Am I placed with the best one? If not, why not? What's my experience mod? What's my minimum mod? And what's our plan to get it there? What's my scheduled credit? Are we maxing it out at 40%? If not, what do we need to do? Lastly, choose your agent wisely because there's a lot at risk. Your company is probably your biggest asset. Now, I hope your current agent's doing a great job, but if you're looking for a change, I'd love to talk to you to see if we're a good fit. And when searching for a new agent, please don't just pick the nicest guy or your beer drinking buddy or somebody local just because they're local. Instead, find an agent that is best for you, best for your company, and best for your employees. The only other thing I'd like to mention is to consider a self-insured group. If you're paying over $300,000 for your work comp, liability, and commercial auto insurance combined, and you have a good claim history, you could quickly cut your insurance costs by up to 50%. If you have any questions regarding a self-insured group, please let me know. Now, the lesson learned from Xavier is to focus on risk management to save a ton of money on your insurance. It's really that simple. Now, before we move on from Xavier, I quickly want to show you a small section taken out of the injury analysis I did for him. The report's about 30 pages. This is just a small clip. Now, these injuries occurred before Xavier was a client of mine, and the first one listed states that the employee was attempting to place a baby inside of a high chair, resulting in low back pain. It then tells us that $38,720 was paid on this claim, which includes medical treatment and any wages they received while they're sitting at home. Next, it says that the claim caused the work comp experience mod to increase by 34.5 points. Now remember, this claim is going to stay on Xavier's experience mod for 3 years. 3 years before it falls off. In other words, this one claim caused the price of Xavier's work comp insurance to go up 34.5% for 3 years. So this claim ended up costing Xavier an additional $155,250 in work comp premium over those 3 years. Now think about that. This one claim took $155,000 out of Xavier's profits. The next claim isn't much better. It says the employee was participating in an after-hours staff picnic in a park, and somehow she injured her knee. $30,000 is paid on this claim, causing Xavier's mod to go up by 33 points for the next 3 years and resulting in Xavier's work comp premium increasing a total of $149,850 over those 3 years. That's 2 claims costing him $300,000 over 3 years. But here's the thing, like most business owners, Xavier had never seen something like this. He had no idea how much his claims were costing him because no one ever showed this to him. If you're interested in having an injury analysis done for your company at no cost, all we need to do is get a copy of your mod worksheet and your loss runs. Now, the last client I want to tell you about is John. I met John through his current insurance agent who brought me on as a consultant because John needed some additional help. I describe John as an old school, hard-nosed, tough cowboy in his mid-60s. He's up at 3 o'clock in the morning. He's at the office by 3:30. And he continues to do his best to grow the family business. His 3 sons and a handful of nephews all work for him, along with about 30 other employees. The work they do is commercial masonry construction. They install a lot of brick on the exterior of schools and apartments. And John once told me a story about when he used to go to college, when he was a young man. He'd wake up at 4 a.m. to milk cows for a local farmer from 4:30 to 6:30, take his college classes from 7 to 11, then he'd go to work for a general contractor from 12 to 7, and then he'd finish out the day by delivering pizzas or washing dishes until about 10 p.m. And he was doing all this while 3 of his 4 children were born. Can you imagine? Now, shortly after I started working with John and his current agent, John received a letter from an attorney, which is never good, regarding a past employee. About 7 months prior, Donald worked for John for a grand total of 13 hours, and then he'd walked off the job, said the work was too hard, and he never came back. Donald said nothing else, and John never heard from him again. It's now 7 months later, and John receives a letter from Donald's attorney stating that he was injured on the job and demanding $80,000 for medical bills and lost time from work. And it gets worse. If John's work comp insurance company pays us $80,000, not only will John's insurance premium increase by about $20,000 a year for the next 3 years, but his experience mod will go well above a 1.0. And like Corey, a mod over 1 will cripple John's business because the majority of the general contractors that John works for require him to have a mod of 1.0 or less. So once again, this is quite serious. Well, luckily, John's insurance company denied the claim. They went to court, they offered Donald $13,000, and he took it. So where did this leave John? Well, his work comp insurance premium increased by about $4,000 a year, but his experience mod went up to a 1.03. So now what? Imagine you're about to lose $80,000 of your future revenue due to some BS work comp claim. What do? Well, I advised John to remove the CPAP credit, which stands for Contractor Premium Adjustment Program credit, which dropped his experience mod back down underneath a 1 to a 0.97. Now that problem was solved, but John wanted me to help prevent this whole Donald situation from ever happening again. Well, here's the thing. about new employees and injuries. Remember, Donald only worked there for 13 hours. Well, Travelers Insurance did a study where they reviewed about 1.2 million work comp claims that came across their desk from 2016 to 2020. And they discovered that 34% of claims occurred during the first 12 months of employment. So, if 1/3 of all injuries are associated with new hires, wouldn't you agree that most companies could do a better job with the hiring process, along with the training? But I get it, everyone's busy, and we're not exactly sure what to do. So when I reviewed John's hiring process, I found several areas that needed attention. But for the sake of time, I'm only going to talk about the job descriptions. As I go over this, ask yourself if your job descriptions contain the following. And if you would like a copy of a job description created for one of my clients, just go to jasonjwebb/job description. First, do your job descriptions have a clear and comprehensive physical requirements section? In this section, list every requirement you can think of and include the Department of Labor's strength level requirement definition. There are 5 levels, ranging from sedentary to very heavy. And I suggest copying and pasting the definition of the appropriate strength level directly onto your job description. Now, if Donald had known that he was required to pick up 90 pounds from ground to waist up to 100 times a day, he might have eliminated himself from the hiring process. Next, include verbiage to set clear expectations and to reduce your company's liability. I would include things like, in addition to the essential duties listed above, I will be asked to perform additional tasks that are also considered essential to this position. And if I feel unsafe, poorly trained, or unable to perform a task safely, I will communicate this to my supervisor immediately. Or how about this? I can meet all physical requirements listed above without the need for additional assistance, medical bracing, or support. Lastly, do all your new hires review, sign, and date their job description. It's important that employees formally acknowledge that they are able and willing to complete the job they're being hired to perform. I believe if these things were in place, there could have been a much better outcome with Donald's claim. But I'm happy to say that once we got John's hiring process in order, along with a few other things, that John was able to drop his annual injury rate from 7 claims per year to 2, and his experience mod continues to improve. Now, one of the lessons learned from John is that a good hiring process can help prevent bankruptcy. If we couldn't get John's experience mod back under a 1.0, it could have been game over. Now, what we reviewed here today only scratches the surface of what's needed when it comes to risk management. Honestly, there's so much information that I decided to write a book. It's titled Your Company's Guide to Workers' Compensation. It's available on Amazon, but for those of you who don't want to read this gripping novel, I summarized it the best I could. Take a look at this diagram. Let me give you a quick overview of how this works. We help our clients with all types of insurance, but work comp is a good place to start because it can be confusing and is typically one of your more expensive insurance policies, which means we can have a big impact relatively quickly. You can see here that we focus on 3 key areas: people, injury, and policy, PIP. Under people, the first pillar is your hiring process because we want to hire qualified people who can do the job. Next, we need to train them. Training includes formal training like HAZCOM and fall protection, but it also includes informal training like toolbox talks and safety meetings. Now, even though you hire the right people and train them correctly, injuries still happen. It's just how it is. So we need a good injury response procedure and use things like nurse triage for all non-emergency injuries beyond first aid. Now, not all injuries result in an insurance claim, but if they do, we can't rely on the adjuster to just handle it for us because they have about 150 open claims on their desk at all times. So, injury management is really important. We need to take an active role in getting your claims closed quickly so we can prevent costly mistakes. And the last section, policy. First, we need to confirm your coverages are correct so claims don't get denied, and then create a pricing strategy designed to get the lowest price possible. In total, there are about 50 processes listed here, or things to consider. Years ago, I added risk management to my insurance practice and created this Risk-Surance system because I became frustrated with how little of an impact I was having on my clients. Here's the thing. Before I took the time to educate myself on the importance of risk management, I believe I did a pretty good job on that coverages section, but I lacked on the rest of this. Maybe your situation is the same with your current agent. And if you'd like to talk about it, I'd love to meet with you. The QR code that you see here brings you directly to my calendar, but you also have my email address and my cell phone number. If risk management is important to you and your company, I'd love to help. Now here's the thing. There is no charge for our risk management services. That's right. This is how it works. Once we become your insurance agent, we are paid a commission from your insurance company, just like your current agent does. And we accept that commission as payment in full for all of our services. So you get the entire Risk-Surance system at no additional cost to you. And I know change can be uncomfortable. Anytime we're uncomfortable, we look for ways to make us comfortable again. I do it too. For example, when my alarm goes off at 5 o'clock in the morning, sometimes I have a very convincing conversation with myself as to why it would be a much better idea to skip my workout and get an extra hour of sleep. We tend to tell ourselves these little white lies like, I don't have time, I'll do it later, or I'm already super ripped and I don't need the workout. Well, let me tell you a little secret. You do have the time. You won't do it later, and I'm not that super ripped. So if any of what I said resonated with you, I'd suggest we talk just to see where you're at with things. Now let me leave you with this. Remember John, the last client we talked about? Well, I want to tell you about his son, Jaden, who is the safety coordinator for his dad's company. Now, Jaden's probably in his mid-30s. He's soft-spoken, he's kind-hearted, and he's a hard worker. Matter of fact, back in high school, he took 5th place in the state wrestling tournament his junior year, and he was favored to win the tournament his senior year. Well, the summer of 2003, before his senior year, Jaden was 17 years old, working with his dad at a job site in Minneapolis doing masonry work. On this warm summer day, something went terribly wrong. The scaffolding that Jaden was working on, 65 feet in the air, was set up incorrectly and Jaden fell 65 feet, crushing his spine and causing his heart to stop. Luckily, his dad knew CPR and could keep him alive until EMS arrived. I mean, just imagine seeing your son fall 6 stories and then needing to do CPR on him. Jaden lived through this, but now must spend the rest of his life in a wheelchair, paralyzed from the chest down. That day, Jaden went to work in the best shape of his life and a future state wrestling champion, but then came home unable to ever walk again. It can happen just like that. Now, I believe it's our responsibility as business owners, executives, safety professionals, HR, risk managers, and insurance agents to do everything we can to keep our employees safe. And I'm on a mission to implement Risk-Surance into 1,000 businesses. I see your employees as mothers, sons, and daughters. And if we can work together to ensure they get home safely to their families, man, we've done something special. Thank you. I look forward to working with you.